noticed that.
Yeah, thanks, Isabel.
Do we need to go back and recap?
Please don't make me.
Will you restate everything?
I haven't heard yet. Thank you all. It's
Anyway.
nice to be with you. I'll see you soon.
Yes, you will. Thank you.
Feel better.
Take care. Oh, my goodness. Take care of your family too.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you.
All right, next we have legislation regarding TIF districts. And so I would assume, Beth, you are here to talk about that, and you? Rebecca,
Yeah, and Don, I think Larry may be on virtually as well. He's been involved in this. So I think, as you know, probably from the announcement last Friday, we are looking to bring Meridian to Bloomington to create a network which involves fiber to the home that will cover virtually the entire city, that will involve coverage of low-income areas, which historically have not been well covered, and certainly not at the speeds that we're talking about, that will operate on an open access net neutrality model, and bring a variety of benefits to the city. And as part of that, Meridian is asking for a TIF. The way this would work with respect to a network, and I'm no expert on these, so let me just declare that I'm not your TIF expert. But the basic idea of it, as you guys know, I think, is to capture the added incremental tax value that results from investment, and then to assign that to use. And this use would be the reimbursement of property taxes that Meridian would accrue as they invest in building up their network. So that's the idea of it, is to refund effectively most of their personal property tax. So the equipment that they will be installing will be paying personal property tax on. And then, sorry. And the TIF would be set up to capture that incremental value, property tax value, and use that to reimburse them as an incentive for them to come in and build out this network, which would be great.
And this has been characterized as a spider TIF, and this, I don't know if anybody else has ever heard of a spider TIF. I think we will need that explained to us. What is that, and what areas does it capture? Well, if you don't have the answers now, I mean, when this comes forward, we'll certainly.
I'm happy to talk about it, Beth, if you want, just really briefly.
Sure.
Thank you, Larry.
It's called Spire TIF mainly just because of the way it ends up looking, because it usually follows a utility line when we're talking about business personal property like this. So the investment in fiber, it's going to spindle out almost like a spider web across the community, because it's going to serve so many households and areas. And so what it actually does is there's a new parcel created, almost like a virtual parcel, that overlays onto the city and follows exactly where the investments are. And so that's where you get the name Spider TIF and why it's so called. But what you're really doing is just, it's very similar to a regular TIF from the standpoint of, except it's dealing with business for personal property, as Beth mentioned, which is you're starting at zero investment, you're capturing the increment of whatever personal property is installed there. And then we also, the second step to this, and the reason why this will be an ordinance, is we'll have to come up with an agreement to return those funds to Meridian, kind of as Beth was outlining. That process for returning those funds to Meridian looks very similar to some of the economic development bonds that you've done. In fact, it follows the same statutory process, where that'll get heard by the Economic Development Commission and will come to you all for approval through that process as well. So this is all kind of together. We're both creating the TIF district and having a revenue sharing agreement from those TIF proceeds that are captured as a result of that increment.
Okay, do you have a second TIF to present, or shall we go to questions right now? All right, any, Councilmember Bowen.
How is this legal?
Yeah, so it is through the statutes where the way that it's legal is the statute very specifically names the process by which you can target a TIF for business personal property, which is to say that the taxpayer must be named. There has to be a specific finding. And we're obviously doing this all through the public statutory process. This is not unusual. Actually, this is kind of more the traditional method for how TIF districts are used, is to
A spider TIF?
not necessarily a spider TIF, but to direct it towards a particular developer or a particular entity that's acting, and then to have some sort of regulation or setup or agreement where some of those funds that are captured by the increment goes back into that TIF district.
I think that it would be nice, in fact, it's necessary for you to sort of give us an analysis of like a greater analysis than what you just did at the meeting. Like, explain to us, if you're saying that this is actually how TIFs are supposed to work, that means that maybe we've been doing TIFs differently over the years, so like this all bewilders me. And I would like some more breakdown when it comes to the actual meeting. I don't know. I'm sort of at sea here. Like I'm singing the Spider-Man theme in my head, and I'm trying to not do that. So
I mean, I do too, but I like that it has a theme song. So
Spider TIF
Yeah, exactly.
does whatever a Spider TIF does. Yeah, that's all. I need to get that out of my head.
That's how we'll open up at the meeting, actually, is with that particular dance.
I'll bring my ukulele.
Can I just ask, I'm sorry, Isabel, I just wanted to make sure. Steve, you would like sort of a more detailed walkthrough of the statutory process and also how these are used for that?
Yeah, one thing that I know I'm going to get questions about, if anybody asks me about the Spider TIF isn't that weird? Doesn't it seem suspect? The TIFs that we've had, like we put a mega TIF together, and that's already something that people remark on its unusual size. So I would like some, justification for an unusual looking TIF.
Okay.
Because it's unusual to us, even if it's, as Larry says, the more usual way that TIFs are done, that's a little surprising to me. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, and it'll take a better explanation. So thank you.
Steve, if I could just step in for half a second.
Sure.
On this, I think, what Larry is getting at is that a TIF that is associated with an individual entity, is not atypical. I think in this case, that individual entity's business personal property, will spread out throughout the community, and that's the origin of the spider moniker. I don't really think that that's a super attractive way to
listen. I'm
it.
entertained. I'm entertained by it. Believe me. If Beth wants to sing, I'm going to be even more entertained.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that.
Yes,
too.
Yeah, Beth, you don't know what you walked into. But when you say, Rick, that it's not unusual, are you saying that statewide or locally? Because it's unusual for us.
There are examples of this being implemented in the telecom sector within Indiana, and I think we'd be happy to pull together some examples.
That's what I'm talking
for you.
about.
I think that will help.
I mean, TIFs are not common for us anymore. We've had a TIF, we haven't done it often. Now we're proposing 3 new TIFs, and one of them is spidery, and they all really need kind of proper context.
Happy to do that.
Sure.
Isabel,
Thank
did you have a question or concern?
Yes, and now I have another one after Councilmember Boland spoke. Let me just, since he just said that, what, 3 TIFs?
Yes.
Where did the 3 TIFs come from?
We're working on, we're working on an east side TIF as well, that because of new medical offices or the need for new medical or support developments around the hospital. And then we're also looking into residential TIFs, creating some residential TIF districts that will help generate will help create more opportunities and more affordable opportunities for residential development.
I see. I have not heard that.
Specifically around Sudbury.
Specifically around Sudbury, but also, but while we're doing it, we might as well look at other opportunities as well. So we're in the process of mapping it out. Sudbury is a great example, the biggest example, but we also have to, it's too big of a thing to pass up. I mean, we need more housing, so we need to really look at, okay, we've got Sudbury, but are there other areas that we could help generate some affordable housing development?
So thank you, Don, for that information. So my actual question about, I had two questions about the Meridian proposal. So is there an argument to be made that Meridian will not invest in Bloomington unless they get this TIF? You don't have to tell me now, but that's definitely at the top of my mind.
Yes, they have said this is vital to them being able to do this.
And then the other question is the TIF going to incentivize investment in low-income areas, or is it going to cover all areas that Meridian is going to lay their broadband?
Yeah, I can address that. This will cover all of the areas that they intend to put infrastructure. And as part of the agreement we're working to finalize with them, they are committed to deploying the network into low-income areas, including potential assurance that their presence in low-income areas that we help define will not drop below their presence elsewhere in the community. So they've raised the bar there at a level that we find compelling, and they've also agreed to the outlines of a very compelling digital equity plan, which were identified in our press release: 250 megabits up and down, 0 monthly cost, and 0 connection cost.
Steve?
Yeah, two things. One is like just answering our questions now isn't really the idea. All the questions we're asking, even though we appreciate the answers, should be, each of the questions we've asked today should be a slide in your presentation and then with the answer, So like Rick, that last answer is interesting, but like, please make sure that it's a part of your presentation. The other thing is, the other question I have is, someone I suspect I've asked in the past, if this is such a desirable thing, why don't we make the entire city a TIF district? Why haven't we done that already years ago? Isn't there an upper limit to what we can make into a TIF district? Again, I don't need the answer today, although any initial answer you want to give is fine. Just make sure that you address that in your presentation as well.
And Steve, I do have a presentation. It seems like we want to just dig into the meat of your questions, though. But yeah, I will make sure that we address everything that's that you're asking about.
I mean, I think it's reasonable to assume that the questions that council members have had today are going to be reflective of the questions that the public would have. And so I'm just saying, like, these are things that really need, like, once you guys are done with your presentation, we can point to it and say, here are the reasons why we voted for or against, So anyway, it just needs to be in your presentation. So thank you.
Thank you. Ron or Sue, do you have any questions? Go ahead.
I have a question that I always want to ask is, does this have any impact on the public? What, as far as, do they have to pay more taxes?
No, that's not really how a TIF will work. The taxes, it's not going to require the public to pay more taxes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope we just make that clear at the presentation as well, just because I know that that's one thing that people are very sensitive about. And so when it ever says tax increment financing district, I just want us to clarify that, so people don't freak out and become upset. They're upset now with the lit and then the school referendum, so they're gonna be sensitive to that anyway. So thank you very much. And it's quite a web of information, isn't it? He shoots scores.
Ooh.
Shoot.
I'd like to add language to whatever ordinance limiting us to one bad per piece of legislation. Beth, could you plan to talk about the implications? I was on the RDC and we never even had to do this, but of administering multiple overlaying tips. So what is the implication? How do we administer a tip overlaying a tip? How does that work? What is the role, and on a larger level, what is the role of the RDC? What is the role of council, both now and going forward? And then I think Steve's question is an interesting one. How do we know when we are over tipped? If you know, a tip is a very powerful tool, I think. So why not use it everywhere? But how do we decide that we are over tipped or that we've reached capacity on tips? So if I could do that too. Yeah. Thank
Well,
you.
if I could throw in there, because you know, Sue makes some good observations, but in addition, like again, my question is like, it seems like we have the incentive to not send any tax dollars to Indianapolis and keep it all here for specific reasons. You know, like, doesn't the state have limits on how we use tips? Like, all those details really need to be explicated.
Isabel.
Yeah, so this may be what Sue was getting at, but is this spider tip going to enter, like, is some of that area going to be area that is already in a TIF? And how does that work?
It is, and only because it deals with business personal property, not real property. So you're prohibited from having an overlay of TIFs that affect the same parcel. So any one parcel of property can only be in one TIF. This is why it creates kind of a virtual parcel that lays on top of the city, because it's only affecting that business personal property, not real property taxes.
I see.
And I think that difference is going to be really important to make. So.
Anything else regarding the Meridian spider tip?
So can I make I want to make sure because Larry brought up a good point. This tip is for the non-real property. This is for their investment in their physical, their personal stuff, right? The fibers that they're putting in. I'm right on that, right,
Yes,
Larry?
you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Sorry, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I said right by, said too softly, yeah. Mhm.
So it's not affecting the TIFs that we already have, like the commercial TIFs that we already have in place, and maybe, and also the residential TIFs that we might create later on. And in fact, I'm not sure they can, if like in the Sudbury, for example, that's already in a commercial TIF, the RCA TIF, I think that has to be cut out to be a residential TIF. It can't exist in the same
I think
space.
that's the kind of thing that is going to hear is to, and how are we going to administer all this? So.
So really then what we're talking about is something closer to the Catalan tax abatement, which was also involving personal property. I mean, the vast majority of the Catalan abatement was their investment in equipment and machinery. Okay. So even though it says TIF on it, it sounds more like a tax abatement. So it's going to be, because the word tax is involved, but we're not actually levying a new tax. It's going to be, I can't really emphasize enough how important it is for you all to explain, as you explained it, especially to the press, that you're not raising a new tax here. You're capturing a tax that's already being collected. All right. Thank you.
All right, does that pretty much exhaust our discussion on Meridian?
I'll mention this is scheduled for the same timeline as the salary ordinance update. So you'll see this in council for first reading June 1st, committee discussion June 8th, and then a second reading and vote on June 15th. I think there are some meetings leading up to that second reading. Larry can fill in here before the Economic Development Commission, I believe, and also the RDC. Larry, do both of those?
Yes, so this will start out, there's a resolution first by the RDC. They'll have to approve an economic development plan and a resolution that then will go to the Plan Commission for approval of that resolution. Additionally, the sharing agreement, which allows us to share some of the increment with Meridian, will go before the Economic Development Commission, and then obviously you all.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. We'll move on to budget process.
One last question before we move on. Are we just planning on this one TIF ordinance coming forward? I know we talked about the east side potential coming to council before some of these.
Just now, it's just this one.
Okay,
Yes,
okay, so
just Meridian.
Isabel, the other two that were mentioned, the east side TIF and then the residential TIFs may be coming after the summer recess.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, and if any of you have any questions about the Meridian project and the TIF, don't hesitate to ask. We're happy to talk.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
All right. Now we move on to budget. And council, of course, has been taking a look at dates and a tentative agenda for the two dates that we have scheduled for a budget retreat as opposed to a budget advance, which will take place on May 31st, June 14th. And you have seen the proposed agenda. So we wanted to use today's work session as an opportunity to maybe provide additional feedback to the administration about what we want to see, how we want to see things structured going forward. Now, refresh my memory, we've decided on the time for the May 31st date, and this is with respect to Isabel and her solid waste district meeting. That one will start at what? Remind me again, 6:30. So 6:30 to 8:30 on May 31st, and then June 14th. I think we can keep that to the already scheduled time of 5 to 7. Is that correct?
Leadership meetings. We could just shorten it.
I think we can maybe forego that. This is kind of important.
Do you want to make a note?
Yeah.
All right, so who wants to begin? You've all seen the tentative schedule for the 2-day budget retreat. Steve.
Yeah, so I've taken some notes based on feedback I've gotten from council members. We've been talking over email about design issues in the budget, which I think is appropriate to discuss here. I've got 3 different points I've gotten from 3 different members as examples of innovation we'd like to see in the design of the budget book. One, like from my end, for example, last year's budget book went back to 2019. So we had 2019 actual when it came to, say, departmental expenses, 2020 actual, 2021 approved, and 2022 proposed. And all I'm asking here is that you not delete the 2019 column so that there from now on always be 3 years, 2019 actual, 2020 actual, 2021 actual, and then 2022 approved, 2023 proposed. That there always be a rolling 5-year view of each department's budget. It's just keeping that column. You don't have to do anything except don't delete that column this year. And then in years to come, we'll have at least 3 years. You don't have to keep adding them until time immemorial, but if we can have a 3-year history that we can see patterns, especially this year when we're going to be comparing a normal year like 2019 to the 2 COVID years. I think it's going to be very important. The second idea was we have some concern about the presentation of revenues, in particular, in general, at the beginning of the budget book. We have sort of the usual pie chart that lists things out. But I mean, and Matt was talking about wanting a better breakdown, for example, of parking revenues, where they come from, where they're going, in particular, what are the permitted uses of revenues. Now, some revenues are general fund type, they're unrestricted, and some of them have to be used only for certain things. And we can talk about what might make sense to us, but in general, we're looking for some better breakdowns at the top of the budget about how, especially about revenues. And then the third item, Susan had expressed in the same way that Matt had expressed a concern about parking revenues, she's expressed an interest in a specific breakdown on consultancy expenditures. How much are we spending on consultation? And I think that figure will need to be broken down too. Namely, there are some that we have an obligation to hire, like it's a bond counsel. And then there are some which I think Susan is probably more concerned about, which is the optional ones, and can we get that not just for last year, but for, like the same kind of 5-year, or in this case, 3 years back, and if you have, so this is kind of a meta budget, like across the board, how are we spending it? I feel like that would fall into category 3. Is that, am I saying that correctly? Is that services? Anyway, these are some of the principles that we're looking toward to try to make the budget clearer. And I would say that at the very, very top as a cherry, like it's hard for me to say definitively how much our budget is, because first of all, we make exceptions for BT and CBU because they are managed by ratepayers, but everything else, like the number seems to be fleeting. We talk about the general fund, but there's all these other funds, so like at the top in big numbers, can we say this year's budget is 106 million or whatever it is, like big friendly page 1, the kind of thing that people look at if they don't look at anything else in the budget. Can we get a 1-page thing on the top of the budget that is really easy for us and the public to understand? So these are some general thoughts. I welcome other people's thoughts, but I feel like we've talked enough about the budget and we've had enough sort of differences of opinion over the most recent budgets that I think that these changes like this are going to make a big deal for everyone's acceptance of the budget, including councils. I welcome other feedback here.
I see Isabel's hand up.
Sorry. Can I answer? Oh, okay.
Well, just to clarify, Steve, it sounds like most of the things you've suggested have to do with the design of the budget book rather than teeing up the discussion on May 31st and June 14th. Is that right?
Sure, but I mean, I think that these are the kind of things we would have asked on May 31st, and so why not? I mean, like again, they're meta issues. I don't follow the question.
Are you asked? I guess I'm wondering, are these questions, is this part of the discussion that we want to have during our budget retreat?
Not really. That's why I'm bringing them up now. But I mean, inevitably, as they come up, this is the kind of thing that I know I and fellow council members are going to be eager to see, because like oftentimes these questions don't come up until budget week, and by then it's kind of too late,
Isabel, do you have something to contribute?
Yes, thank you. So on the what Steve was talking about on the what is actually presented to us in the budget books, I totally agree about the revenues, and broken down also by department. Like Public Works gets revenues from general funds, street, whatever, I would like to see what revenues each department has and how they intend to use them. It seems like I ask every year, and still every year it's not presented in a more clear fashion. So, so that would be very helpful. As far as the discussion starting on the 31st, I like the rough agenda that we received. As we talk about the different topics, and I guess that's listed as day 2 of the different categories of spending, I really would like to focus on the city's plans, adopted plans, and how we are doing in implementing those plans. So, you know, the transportation plan, the climate action plan, the things that we even put in our comprehensive plan, you know, how are we doing on attaining these goals, and how can we put in the 2023 budget further steps towards those goals?
Yeah, and if I can just add to my concerns about consultants and the fees, I would like to see that broken down by department as well. What different departments in the city are using outside expertise? What kind of reports are being generated by that outside expertise? And then more to the point, how is that being implemented? How's it being used? And if there could be some sort of discussion about how is that moving the city forward with respect to cost savings, or initiation of policies. I think it would be helpful to actually have that done, not just by numbers, but by name. What, you know, for instance, the Novak report, or I've been told by certain people that there was a report called the Evergreen report. What did that say? What recommendations came out of that? And how many of those recommendations are actually being utilized? In addition to how much those outside expertise reports are costing us, but more to the point, what's it netting us? Where's it getting us? So if we could have a by department discussion about those kinds of things, that's certainly helpful for me. I can better understand things when it's presented to me in a narrative fashion, as opposed to just look at the line item under services category 3. This is how much we spent for services. Well, I want to know more about what the breakdown of those services are. Does that make sense, everybody? Ron or Sue, do you have anything to add about what's in front of us with the budget retreat?
When I see the budget, I would love to see, so when we voted for the lit increase, I just want to make sure that it clearly shows that in this new budget that if there's so much money that's being spent for housing in the city, I just want to be able to see that, okay, so it was 500,000, and now the new budget shows $1.5 million, because we added $1 million during the lit. So if I see that and it's clear to me, and then it would be clear to the public, I think that would be really great, because then we'll know that we feel really good and that it's very transparent, that that's what we did. We said we'd do that. Here it is, it's being shown. And then we can just, argue more about more finer details in it. But in a larger sense, I think those things would be really good for any of the things that we added money to for lit. If we just show that during this process, I think it's, I think it's going to be really more transparent and really helpful to everyone. So.
Sue?
Yeah, I think it's gonna, also regarding the lit, I think it's gonna be helpful to start hearing, the administration may not be able to share everything at this point, but to start hearing some administrative details on how some of those funds will be spent. In particular, I'm thinking just, for example, of the social equity fund. We had a ton of good ideas about how that could be spent. It could do this, it could help with housing, it could be MACM, it could, we never heard from any of those potential partner agencies at that stage. We're at a point where we need to start hearing how that could be administered, or at least some ideas. We'll decide this fall and in 2023, and that's fine. But but I think it's time to actually start talking about specific ideas, so.
Well, I might be able to answer some. So we've since added a few things to the budget retreat agenda. On day one, we put in CARES, ARPA, LIT as a discussion, and also CARES, ARPA, and LIT as a discussion on day two as well.
Can you also add opioid settlement to that too?
Yeah.
Because, and I realize that's gonna come over time, but that's in the mix, and it's in the mix for some of the same funding objectives.
Yeah.
Future,
Yeah,
future
good point,
objectives.
Sue.
Steve,
Yeah, I mean, based on everything I've just heard, especially what Ron and Sue have just said, I think, and I don't want to speak for Susan here, but I think that it would be in everyone's interest if the administration hired a design consultant, literally a graphic designer, to rethink the budget book. It would be money very well spent. The questions that we have are all about, they all stem from the kind of dry and difficult to decipher nature of a typical budget. I mean, what the state requires us to file with them is, you know, like a good sleeping pill, you know, like it's hard to find your way through the required documents, even though it
oh, wait a
allows
minute,
us.
Steve. Wait just a minute, Steve.
Here's that
Before we
consultation.
hire outside consultants, do we have no one in-house who can design a budget book that is more user-friendly for not only council members?
Listen, I
for the
can
general
think of,
public?
she's technically not in-house, but I mean, a certain administrator's wife is an excellent designer, but she's busy with a little infant. I mean, if I had my choice, I'd hire Danielle. All right.
I think he has
But,
said no on behalf of his wife
I
and
think
infant.
that would be a major conflict of interest, but I appreciate the thought.
Yes, it would. But the idea is like somebody, like literally a graphic designer, somebody who, and then the first thing you assign them is to have them watch this meeting, so that they get a sense of what, yeah, and then show them last year's budget book and say, how would you redesign the frontispiece, the first pages, so that it makes sense to everybody. I am serious about this. Yeah.
No, I mean, we do have an amazing graphic designer that's our communications director.
Andrew?
Andrew's an excellent
Oh,
graphic designer.
I didn't know that. All right, good. Well,
Then make sure you did before this.
Let us look internally before we spend more
So
money
make,
on outside.
that's fine. I
consultants.
didn't know we had a designer on staff, so please give the budget book to Andrew and have him watch this meeting and have him redesign the budget book accordingly. Thank you. Yes.
More
As
breakouts.
long as he has enough time. If not, that's the problem. I mean.
Clear his schedule.
Budget is the most important thing we do.
It's
We
the
need to get this
most
right.
important thing we do.
Anyway, good suggestions. All, anything else regarding the 2 dates we have earmarked for a budget retreat? It's gonna be, I think, good. I think it's gonna be much more comprehensive and you know, take these ideas and let's run with them, and so that we spend less time maybe during budget week kind of talking about some of these granular details. All right, Isabel.
Yeah, I was wondering if there had been any discussion on revising the schedule for the actual, I mean, I know we already passed our annual council schedule, but has there been any consideration to adjusting the schedule in August and September to allow a little more time between the budget hearings and the actual proposing of the legislation, so that council members would have time to negotiate with the administration as to any changes?
I think we're gonna try to get it done as soon as possible. I mean, we've talked about it. We don't have a date in mind yet, but I mean, last time it was, I think once it was done, we gave it to you, and that was pretty late. So we're trying to see if we can get those, you know, things to you sooner.
No, I'm talking about after budget week, after the hearings. To
Oh,
have an
okay.
extra week in there before the legislation is proposed, so that council members have more time to negotiate any changes they'd like to see.
I see.
Stephen, what does our calendar currently look like? Is it the same amount of time as last year?
Let me pull up our annual calendar. I think what we had discussed last year, maybe the year before, was a meeting in between the budget hearings and the submittal of the final proposal, which kind of locks in a certain amount that we can't go above. For council members to kind of react to and provide feedback on the budget presentation. So we don't have a date set for that. Currently, our annual schedule has the budget hearings scheduled for
Week of the 29th.
Monday, what was that, the 29th?
29th of August, that week.
August 29th through September 1st. And if I recall, we have the budget cycle scheduled from September 28th for first reading and a committee discussion, and then a vote on October 12th. And I believe there's a 10-day notice ahead of that, so September 18th would.
So you want longer than the 10 days? Is that what you're asking?
We're talking, I think between September 1st, which would be the end of the budget presentations, and then September 18th, which I believe is the last possible date to submit the budget to the state ahead of the public hearing on the 28th. Some additional meetings so council members can provide feedback based on the budget hearings. Is that what you're asking about, Isabel?
Well, more time, yes. I don't know necessarily that we would need another meeting.
Oh, I see.
Just another week of time to.
We'd have to present the budget presentation earlier, right? Because we're at the.
There's a deadline, I think the 1st of November to actually vote on the budget. So the October 12th date does have a little bit of room after that, although we build in a cushion so that we're not, running into problems at the last minute. Yes, I think there's a few weeks built in that would involve changing the annual schedule and making sure that we're not missing any deadlines and that the controller's office would have time to do what they need to do to get things submitted. I'll say it would be hard, I think, to move up the budget presentations that are scheduled for August 29th through September 1st. I know 1 year the council moved that, I think, a week earlier. Next year, the controller's office was saying, please give us time. That's when they're trying to get all the information from the departments and things finalized. So it may be possible. I think the controller's office would need to weigh in on moving the cycle where you're scheduled to consider the legislation back, just to make sure that they've got time to do what they need to do.
Isabel, do you think that having a more comprehensive budget retreat, which is what we're planning on, will this alleviate some of the, pressures that you're talking about to make sure that council is clearly communicating to the administration what we want and what we expect?
Maybe. Time will tell.
I can answer that.
Isabel.
No, go ahead, Don.
No, I think what we want to do, we also, so yes, this early budget retreat that we're having, that should be the first volley, but we want to have continuous conversations, way more than we've had in the past, going up to this. So there should be plenty of time. There shouldn't be any silence between now and the budget. By hopefully we get to a point where we're all in agreement. Not all in agreement, but we have something that we all alike at the end of this. So we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to avoid what happened last year, right? Where we're in front of the public arguing, when we could be talking behind the scenes.
Steve?
Well, I mean, isn't this going to be a public meeting too, the budget retreat?
Yes.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's still in front of the public, it's just not in chambers. But more importantly, for the past several terms, frankly, the budget advance has been, we get a basic report of finances from the mayor and the controller, and then we hear each council member's budget priorities, but it's been relatively ineffective because we can't and don't ultimately set those numbers. They have to be done by the administration. The budget retreat idea is, I mean, if I'm finally understanding why we're using these terms, the thing that Don is talking about, the only difference I'll say is when we did budget retreats in my first term in the mid-aughts, it was still primarily a discussion of expenditures. And I think what I'm hearing from my colleagues this year is that there's so many new sources of revenue that we don't have I mean, especially Ron's questions have been really interesting about, we're not entirely clear where all the revenues are coming from and how they're being split up. Like we need sort of overviews of it. And there's going to be discussion of revenue as much as of expenditure at the advances. So,
And
but
the PS lit too, deserves.
all of the above, like, we don't, the budget is a lot more complex than it used to be because the general fund no longer covers, I mean, I wonder if the general fund is even the majority of our budget anymore. I don't think it is. And there's a lot of moving parts that I think I speak for my colleagues when I say that we haven't quite got our heads wrapped around all the moving parts of revenues. We're going to need more charts like we've been saying, but I think we're also kind of, I mean, Ron's, I think the point that Ron made was about the lit. I and other people have agreed with Ron that we really want to track the lit in the future. We don't just want it to fall into one big lump and we don't know, how that we feel like we have a responsibility to see how the lit's being used. And so that conversation has to happen at the budget retreat as well. So I hope that sort of clarifies things. This is Don, what you're proposing with the budget retreat, a 2-tiered budget retreat, is the right direction. We need to have a deeper discussion of the budget than what we've done with the budget advance in the past. So
Thanks,
thank
Steve.
you.
Would it be useful to try to carve out another meeting between the retreat, and then of course we go on our hiatus, and then we come back before the presentations on August 29th?
In July.
Yeah,
At the end of July.
After everyone's had a chance to kind of digest what's come about from the retreat, is it?
But we can also get, I mean, the department heads are going to be, like in the past, we've been told, well, the department heads have been busy putting their budgets together. We don't really want to talk about it until budget week. And as Donna said, we just can't do that anymore. We sort of need to have one more retreat at the end of July to see where they're at and whether or not our questions are going to be answered.
Either that or just our one-on-ones, one-on-twos, whatever we need to do.
Sure, but that happens at the end of July.
Yeah, let's keep, I'm gonna make sure that our lines of communication are going.
I really want to advocate for not a one-on-one and not a one-on-two.
Yes.
And I respect
It's gotta be public.
your opinion, Don, but I think when we do it all together, I honestly think that it's a public meeting, and I learned a lot from when Isabel talks, or Steve talks, or Susan or Sue or Matt. It's Jim, it's just, the questions and everything prompted me to understand things better, so.
I think it would be a great idea. The more the merrier, and it would make it easier because it's not like we have to say it once.
Yeah.
It would be great. I just have to make sure I've got so many moving parts, so I'm gonna have to, I have to go back and say, hey, can we do this another time? And so, yeah, I guess present it, and then if that's what you guys are asking, all I can do is go to the administration, go to my controller and say, hey, can we do this again? Find out, they can either tell me yes or no, or Don, you're crazy and pack up. But that's, you know, I'm willing to do that if that's what you guys want to do.
I think it's a great idea. Let's look for a date in July or a couple of
Yeah.
dates in July. We can just do another free presentation sit down for better understanding, better clarity, and how we can present this to the public.
But
in a
yeah,
way
I mean, yeah,
they understand.
to follow up on what Susan and Ron have said, I mean, Ron hit the nail on the head. It's not about following up to make sure that the questions we asked in May and June were answered. It's, I mean, what Isabel has been looking for is more meaningful discussion before budget week. Okay, like by the time we get to budget week, you know, the each department head is set, you know, like they're not in the mood to change. You know, they've been juggling enough stuff as it is. But meanwhile, council members, you know, already, like, we felt for years that the budget advance has been woefully inadequate to, you know, to get our priorities heard. And by last year, we were ready to stop the budget process over it. So, like, I feel like, you know, the check-ins, like May, June, this late May, early June, late July, that gives you all time to prepare things, but it also gives us meaningful opportunities to say, that's not going to fly, or we really want to encourage you to do this, and so on. So, I mean, I feel like every council member is sort of on the same page here. And I think that a hard date in late July would be ideal.
Yep, I agree. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, anything else with respect to the budget process, the budget book? This has been a pretty helpful conversation.
And Andrew Krebs needs to be a part of every conversation. No, I mean, it's funny, but it's also serious. Like, if he's going to be a designer, if he's in the room and we can tell him we want to see this, somebody whose job is design communication, you know, is crucial. Like, I actually think he's the missing piece. Make sure he's in on every meeting.
Yeah, well,
Or Don, if there's someone else besides Andrew, because I see
Yeah,
you look
of course.
terrified. Whoever it is, you know, in other words, let's involve them in this process too.
yeah,
Right.
I've got 3 people who handle communications, 3 staff members, and 1 is a part-timer for the whole city of Bloomington. So that's what I got. So I just.
We'll give it some thought.
I'm sorry.
I understand what you're saying about
Yeah.
the way we communicate. When we have these very complex things, sometimes design makes it easier to absorb.
Not sometimes. I think it's a requirement.
And visuals, other than
Yeah.
just columns of numbers, for those of us.
There needs
that-
to be a graphic designer in the room.
Words,
Yeah.
better than we digest numbers.
And if you
Absolutely.
hire an outside consultant, we are not going to criticize you. Absolutely.
I will.
Yes, you
Hey, listen, if the communications person just works with words, that's not what we need. We need a graphic designer for the budget book. We really do.
Let's look in-house before we go outside. That's all.
But as Don just said, we have 2.5 people for the whole city. Which one of them can do graphic design?
I've got 2 that do graphic design, and 1 is
All
a
right, one of them.
copywriter, and the third is a copyright. So next time, probably in 2024, I'm gonna ask for a communications department. I'm gonna. ask
That's
for that
fine. I will.
department.
Yes, please. I've been begging for this for years. Yes, you need a communications
Okay.
department. Yes.
Do that.
All right, I think we have exhausted this topic for now. Good discussion. Thank you all. Real quick before we go, anybody need anything for Jack Hopkins? There are 3 of us here in the room who have been a part of this, but if you want to know, it was a very smooth process and we made good decisions. And Stephen, you want to say anything more about that real quickly?
I know there's an interview committee meeting at 1 o'clock. Ron may need to head out for that. So I'll just mention the committee met earlier this week, I believe, to finalize its recommendations. The committee had $317,000 appropriated for this year. And we received 32 applications. The committee is recommending funding for, I believe, 28 agencies for a total of just short of $339,000. So the committee is using all of the funds appropriated for this year and has requested that the administration bring an additional appropriation ordinance later in the fall for use of just under $22,000 from unused funds from last year and previous years to award, again, just about $339,000. The administration has said it's willing to bring that additional appropriation. So most of the funds, like most years, go toward things for housing, healthcare, food, legal services, youth care. I will note that we've seen an increase in requests for operational funds due to a change in the committee's criteria, which now allows for those requests on a more general basis. So that's the quick version. You all will see a report from the committee before the resolution comes to you, I believe, June 15th.
Yeah, we left nothing on the table. We used the leftover money from last year that was not spent to be able to allocate as much as we possibly could. It was a good process. I think we all felt good about it. So any questions? All right, I think this concludes our work session. Thank you very much. We'll see you all later.
Thank you all.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is your head spinning about trying to find another July date?